Hello everyone, my name is Shreya Nupane and my Capstone project focuses on the Behavioral Affordability Assessment Framework or BAAF, proposed for Klarna's Buy Now Pay Later environment. Buy Now Pay Later provides consumers with convenience and payment flexibilities, but it can also make it more difficult to evaluate how an additional installment obligation fits within a consumer's broader financial circumstance. My capstone examines how Klarna could address this challenge by providing transactional level affordability guidance at the point of purchase while preserving consumers' choice and maintaining a convenient checkout experience. Throughout this presentation, I will explain the problem, the proposed BAAF solution, its supporting technology and consumer experience, and how the framework could be tested and implemented responsibly. Understand why this framework may be necessary, it is important to first understand the scale and structure of Buy Now Pay Later affordability challenge. In 2023, 6 major Buy Now Pay Later providers originated approximately 335.8 million loans, totaling to around $45.2 billion. But market size alone does not explain the affordability issue. Of greater importance is how frequently these obligations can overlap. CFPB research found that approximately 63% of Buy Now Pay Later borrowers had multiple simultaneous Buy Now Pay Later loans at some point during 2022, and approximately 33% borrowed from more than one Buy Now Pay Later provider at the same time. This creates an important information problem. A provider such as Klarna may have detailed information about obligations within its own platform, but may not have complete visibility into buy now, pay later obligations a consumer holds with other providers. Therefore, an individual installment may appear manageable when viewed by itself, while the consumer may actually be managing several overlapping financial commitments. This is a specific gap my proposed framework is designed to address. This leads to an important distinction between whether a consumer qualifies for credit and whether an additional transaction appears manageable within their current financial circumstance. This challenge highlights an important distinction between creditworthiness and transaction-level affordability. Traditional credit assessment is primarily concerned with whether a consumer qualifies for credit and their capacity to repay. It may consider factors such as credit history, existing debt, and broader repayment risk. Transaction-level affordability asks a somewhat different question. Does this particular purchase appear manageable within the consumer's current financial circumstance? Answering the question requires greater attention to factors such as income and cash flow, recurring expenses, existing obligations, and the additional burden created by the transaction being considered. These concepts are related, but they are not interchangeable. A consumer may qualify for credit while still facing short-term financial pressure from an additional purchase. BAAF is therefore not intended to replace Klarna's existing underwriting process. Instead, it introduces an additional decision support layer designed to evaluate the transaction within a broader affordability context. This proposed behavioral affordability assessment framework is designed to address this information gap. The proposed Behavioral Affordability Assessment Framework, or BAAF, is designed to address this information gap by adding an AI-supported decision support layer to the Buy Now, Pay Later purchase process. The framework begins with information about the proposed transaction and with consumer authorization, broader financial information such as income and cash flow, recurring expenses, and existing obligations. The BAAF then evaluates this information alongside relevant affordability indicators and behavioral patterns to assess the transaction within the consumer's broader financial context. Rather than simply producing an approval or denial, the framework translates the assessment into explainable guidance. This could include an affordability signal, the primary factors influencing the assessment, and the alternative option when a transaction appears more difficult to manage. An important feature of the framework is that the consumer retains agency. BAAF is designed to inform the consumer before purchase completion rather than automatically preventing the transaction. It is also not intended to replace Klarna's existing underwriting process. Instead, it adds a complementary affordability assessment focused on improving decision quality at the moment the consumer is considering the purchase. Slide 4 provides a high-level view of the proposed solution. This slide shows how BAAF would operate within the consumer journey. The process begins with consumer consent. Before broader financial information is assessed, the consumer would explicitly authorize the use of relevant financial data for the affordability assessment. Once authorized, the transaction information is integrated into broader financial context, including income and cash flow, recurring expense, and existing obligation. BAAF then evaluates this information using affordability and behavioral indicators to assess whether the proposed transaction appears manageable within the consumer's current financial circumstance. The assessment then translates into explainable recommendation. Rather than presenting only a score, the consumer would receive an affordability signal along with the primary factors influencing the recommendation. Finally, the consumer remains in the control of the decision. Depending on the recommendation, the consumer may proceed with the purchase, modify the transaction, or consider an alternative. This structure is important because BAAF is intended to support informed decision making rather than removing consumer autonomy. The next question is what the consumer would actually see when interacting with this framework. To demonstrate how BAAF could translate into an actual consumer experience, I developed a 7-screen Figma prototype representing the complete customer journey. These 3 screens highlight some of the most important consumer-facing components. First, the financial wellness screen introduces the optional affordability assessment. It tells the consumer what information would be reviewed, including monthly income, recurring expenses, existing Klarna payments, and available cash flow. Importantly, the consumer can choose whether to continue or skip the assessment. Second, the assessment screen demonstrates how financial information could be translated into an understandable affordability overview before the purchase is completed. The consumer can see the proposed transaction alongside broader financial context rather than evaluating the installment amount in isolation. Third, the AI explanation screen addresses explainability instead of simply providing a score, and the interface identifies the factors contributing to the recommendations and makes clear that the assessment supports the consumer's decision rather than replacing their judgment. The values and affordability score shown in this prototype are illustrative rather than validated performance results. The purpose of the prototype is to demonstrate and eventually test the proposed consumer experience. Behind this consumer-facing experience is a technical architecture designed to securely integrate financial data and generate the affordability assessment. Behind the consumer-facing prototype is a technology architecture designed to securely transform financial and transaction information into timely and explainable guidance. The first component is open banking. With consumer authorization, open banking can provide additional financial context, including information related to income, cash flow, expense, and financial obligations. Importantly, the framework recognizes that this information may still be incomplete. AI and machine learning provide the primary analytical capability. Rather than relying on a single financial indicator, the proposed affordability engine would evaluate multiple relevant financial and transaction variables to assess the proposed purchase within the consumer's current circumstance. Explainable AI then translates the analytical output into information that consumers can understand. This includes the key factors influencing the assessment, potential implications, alternatives, and appropriate communication of uncertainty. APIs provide the connections among Klarna's existing systems, open banking services, and consumer-facing applications, while cloud infrastructure supports the scalable processing required to perform these assessments within the checkout environment. Each technology therefore has a specific role. The objective is not to use emerging technologies simply because it's available, but to create an architecture that is explainable, integratable, scalable, and appropriate for the proposed decision support function. Because these technologies would process sensitive financial information and influence consumer guidance, technical capabilities alone is not sufficient. The framework also requires strong cybersecurity, privacy, and governance control. Because BAAF would connect multiple systems containing sensitive financial information, cybersecurity and privacy cannot be treated as separate considerations added after development. The first requirement is security. Financial information and analytical outputs would require protection through encryption, access control, and continuous monitoring. Protecting data integrity is particularly important because unauthorized modification of financial information or model inputs could affect the affordability assessments itself. The second requirement is consumer consent. External information should only be accessed with the appropriate consumer authorization and defined permissions, with transparency about what information is being accessed and why. The third BAAF should follow purpose limitation. More data does not automatically mean better decision. Information should be collected only when it has a defined relationship to the affordability assessment rather than simply because it is technically available. Finally, the framework requires continuous oversight. Vulnerabilities, cybersecurity incidents, and other operational problems should trigger investigation and appropriate remediation. Together, these controls support a privacy by design approach in which security, consent, responsible data use, and oversight operate throughout the BAAF lifecycle. Once these controls are established, the next challenge is determining whether BAAF actually creates value and performs as intended. My proposed performance framework evaluates BAAF across 5 complementary dimensions rather than relying on a single measure of success. The first financial performance examines outcomes such as repayment completion, delinquencies, charge-offs, loss severity, and risk-adjusted financial performance. This helps determine whether BAAF contributes to a sustainable portfolio rather than simply increasing or decreasing transaction activity. Second, operational performance evaluates whether the framework can function reliably within Klarna's checkout environment. Relevant measures include response time, system availability, open banking connection success, and data completeness. Third, model performance evaluates analytical quality through measures such as calibration, precision, recall, error rates, and stability over time. Fourth, consumer outcomes determine whether BAAF actually supports better decision making. Measures include explanation comprehension, purchase modification, hardship requests, complaints, repayment completion, and subsequent borrowing behavior. Finally, governance performance evaluates fairness, model drifts, validation finding, privacy incidents, cybersecurity events, and remediation. These dimensions must be interpreted correctly. For example, lower charge-offs would not necessarily represent success if they were accompanied by poor consumer outcomes, significant fairness concerns, or unacceptable privacy risks. Therefore, BAAF should advance only when the evidence demonstrates acceptable performance across the broader system. Before operational deployment, however, Klarna would first need predefined criteria for determining whether the prototype and pilot are performing well enough to advance. Before operational deployment, BAAF should first be evaluated through control testing to determine whether it improves consumer comprehension without creating excessive checkout friction. I propose 2 initial criteria: at least a 10 percentage point improvement in comprehension compared with the control condition, and no more than a 30-second increase in median checkout time. These are proposed management criteria, not empirical findings or industry standards, and both should be evaluated alongside broader performance and governance measures. If the criteria is not met, BAF can be revised and retested before moving forward. Beyond performance, BAF must also operate responsibly. This requires four key principles: fairness across consumer groups, transparency about how recommendations are generated, consumer autonomy, and ongoing oversight. Importantly, BAF provides a guidance rather than automatically restricting a transaction, so the consumer retains the final choice. Together, these principles ensure that responsible AI involves more than predictive accuracy. It also requires fairness, transparency, autonomy, and accountability. For that reason, any broader implementation should be gradual and evidence-based. Because BAAF involves sensitive financial data and consumer decision-making, implementation should be gradual and evidence-based. The roadmap progresses through 6 phases: governance and requirements, technical deployment and data integration, prototype validation, a limited operational pilot, enterprise evaluation and refinement, and controlled expansion with continuous monitoring. Most importantly, progression is not automatic. Evidence generated at each phase determines whether BAF should advance, be revised and retested, remain limited, or stop. This phased approach allows Klarna to evaluate consumer, technical, performance, and governance risk before broader deployment. BAF has the potential to create value for both consumers and Klarna. For consumer, it could improve affordability awareness, provide clearer explanations, and support more informed decisions while preserving consumer choice. For Klarna, BAF could strengthen decision support and risk visibility, potentially improve repayment outcomes, and support responsible AI practices. These benefits are prospective and would need to be validated before broader deployment. Overall, BAAF creates the potential for shared value by supporting better informed consumers and more responsible growth. In conclusion, BAAF addresses a key buy now, pay later challenge by providing transaction level affordability guidance using broader financial context. The framework is designed to complement existing underwriting while preserving consumer choice through explainable guidance. Because BAF is a proposed framework, a broader deployment would depend on controlled validation, strong governance, and evidence of acceptable performance. Ultimately, the goal is to preserve the convenience of buy now, pay later while helping consumers make better informed financial decisions. This presentation also includes my AI use disclosure, consistent with the disclosure provided in my capstone.